Hi, and welcome to Razzball Radio for Thursday, June 26th. We got a big fish today, ladies and gentlemen, or gentlemen for ladies. Probably statistically, that's how it really is. Larry Schechter, one of the winningest fantasy baseball managers on the planet. Okay, I don't really know what's happening in Taiwan and Japanese fantasy baseball leagues, but at least in America, this guy's tops. Not only has Larry won Tout Wars 6 times. That's not a typo. That's 6 times. He's also won Labor, and he's the author of Winning Fantasy Baseball. You can check the book out at winningfantasybaseballthebook.com. He is at Larry Schechter, LarrySchechter. Whew, that's an intro. Hi, Larry. How are you, buddy? Welcome to Razzball Radio, my friend.
I'm good, Nick. Glad to be here.
Listen, I assure you, we are very good, are glad to have you, my friend. So, Larry, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about players whose seasons this year have drastically altered their 2014 draft rankings. So obviously we're kind of halfway through the season here, Larry, so it's still early times, but we are close to midway. So it is a good time to kind of start getting an idea, especially if you play in keeper or dynasty leagues, where players are at. So let's start off with a player who got a lot of hype coming into the season, and thus far he's delivered. Billy Hamilton. When I look at how he's done this year, I'll be honest, he's kind of surpassed my expectations. 272 average isn't great, but he's hit more home runs than I anticipated he would get this year. Is he kind of a 10 home run, 60 steal player for next year? Is that kind of a realistic expectation for him?
I think he's more of like a 5 to 7 home runs and maybe 70 to 80 steals. I think there's upside on the steals. And he's really interesting because at the beginning of the year he had all this potential, but there was this big question mark: would he fail? So for me, I figured. I estimated him for 500 at bats just because it's like if he plays full time, he's going to get 600 at bats, and if he fails miserably and gets sent to AAA, it could be a big bust. But now we know he's not a big bust, and there's no reason to think he can't do this again next year. When Trout had that great first year, people were saying, well, he's going to regress in year two, and or some people have a sophomore slump or something. But Billy Hamilton with like a 250 or 60 batting average, with all that speed, his average isn't going to regress from that, and his speed isn't going to regress. So I think he's very solid next year. He should be a first round draft pick next year.
Are you serious? First round?
Yeah, well, his value right now, if I'm glancing away from the screen, I'm looking at my computer here. His value so far, if you just extrapolate what he's done so far for a full season, his value is like $32 or $33, and that's at a pace of 540 at bats because he missed a few games with an injury, and he missed a few games because he got off to a slow start. But 540 at bats with a $32 value, that puts you into first round territory. Even if his average were to kind of drop off to more like the 250 range, which a lot of people were expecting, he'd still be worth $30. And if he were to, but if he gets like 600 at bats as a leadoff guy and hits 260 with 60, 65 steals, I mean that's first round territory.
Okay, that's really interesting, and this is why I am not winning fantasy baseball this year. I'm having a terrible season. We're going to transition into Dee Gordon, who's a similar type player, but when I look at them, I see Juan Pierre 2014. What's the difference? What am I missing in that?
Well, the first thing is some people have the idea like they don't want a player with a low batting average. So like a Juan Pierre, Michael Bourne, so if the guy's not hitting for a good average, well, actually, I take that back. Actually, I mean Pierre and Bourne actually I think had decent averages like 270, 280, which is not bad. So what I should be saying is people look at a player like that and say it's just a one category player, and one category player is not that valuable. Well, that's not true because like a Billy Hamilton and Juan Pierre, if they hit 270 and they score 80, 90, 100 runs and they hit a few home runs and they get 40 RBIs and then you put in that killer 60, 70 stolen bases, when you put that into a value formula, if you have a properly done value formula, you get a player who's worth $20 or more. And like in the case I said, Hamilton actually is 33, and Dee Gordon right now, I mean, he is probably, maybe the biggest surprise of the season so far. He's at a pace where he's producing around $35 of value. That's currently he's got like a 275 batting average, 90 a pace of about 90 runs, 50 RBIs, and 80 stolen bases. And now he's coming down the last couple months. I think he's hit around 250 or something in May or June, and his stolen bases have come down a little bit. But that's again huge. If he for next year, if he hit like 250 with 65 stolen bases, you're still into like a $27, $28 player, which is probably, probably something like a second round pick in most drafts. And I'm not sure what they're going to do in LA because when this year started, Alex Guerrero was supposedly going to be the second baseman. And, which is why Gordon is such a huge surprise. People didn't even think he'd be playing on a regular basis. So next year they're going to have to do something. If Guerrero's ready, I don't know if they're going to move Hanley to third base and Gordon or Guerrero play shortstop. I'm not sure, but they're going to have to keep Dee Gordon in the lineup.
Okay, we've got about 45 seconds here before we go to break. But real quick then, if you're telling me that Billy Hamilton's is $33 value, Dee Gordon's is $35 value, I am not arguing with you, Larry, of course. But what's Rajai Davis worth then, real quick?
Well, let me just say, I mean, that's the level they're producing at right now so far this season. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that next year I would pay that much for them at a draft or auction, but I think they're going to be way up there. Rajai Davis, offhand I don't know. I haven't looked at him recently, so
I'm just Larry. I'm just trying to figure out how, because. I'm looking at the numbers, and again, I'm not arguing. Well, I'm taking notes. I assure you.
Well, let me just say this is why people should have a value formula. In my book, I have a chapter on how you put together a value formula. This is why a value formula is so crucial because you look at these players and you got these numbers, and you're not sure. Well, so do these numbers mean $15? Do they mean $25? Or whatever? And if you have a value formula, you can say exactly what they're worth. And now I'm talking here about 5x5.
Right.
If somebody's in a 4x4 league or 6x6 or whatever, then if you have a value formula, you can adjust it for your specific format.
Okay, that's fair. Listen, Larry, we're going to go to break, but we'll be right back with more Larry Schechter here on Razzball Radio. Okay, we're back again with Larry Schechter, the author of Winning Fantasy Baseball. Check out the book at winningfantasybaseball.com. Everett Cabrera looks like one of the few players this year who hasn't kind of bounced back from the post-biogenesis issues. What's happening with Everett?
That's a good question, and I've been wondering about that myself because I own him on a couple of salary cap leagues, and I actually dropped him recently. I think, I know that earlier in the year he had some kind of leg injury, so he wasn't running for a while. He actually got off to a great start batting average, but there was a period of a few weeks where he wasn't running, and that seemed to have cleared up, and he got a few stolen bases after that. He's only on a pace for like 30 stolen bases. This is a guy who the last 2 years was on a pace for about 65 and 60 stolen bases.
Correct.
And, he's hitting like about 225 or something like that right now. I think one thing with him is he only had one good year of batting average. Last year was the only year where he had something like a 280 or so batting average. So he's not a guy where I can say, well, he's got a long track record of hitting 270, 280, so I'm sure he's going to be fine because he doesn't have a long track record. So I think he's got to come up from the 225. His BABIP is a little bit lower than it usually is, but he's not somebody I can say, oh yeah, he's going to be back to 270. He may get up to 240 or 250, and the stolen bases ought to improve a bit because he hasn't been getting on base that much. You can't run if you're not on base, but I don't see him getting up to that 60 stolen base level either. So I think he's been a huge disappointment. And if you're in a league right now and you need stolen bases, he's probably not a bad buy low candidate if you can get him really cheap because he's got to do better than what he's been doing. But we're talking about next year. Next year, I think he goes way down. He was like a 20. People paid like $20-$25 for him this year at auctions, and next year he's probably looking at more like $10 or $15 depending how the rest of the season goes. So
what round are you projecting he should go in next year?
Off the top of my head, that's not something I have in my head. It's like a $10 to $15 player. What round would that be? That's pretty. $10 is pretty low. If you're in like a 10 or 12 team mixed league draft, somebody who's worth $10, that's probably like borderline even getting drafted.
Right. And I'm just curious because I don't think you and I have discussed this before. When we talk about players like Dee Gordon or Everett Cabrera, how much does position eligibility factor in for you personally?
For me personally, position scarcity, except for catchers, there's no such thing as position scarcity. So when I say, like, Hamilton's at a $33 level or something, there's no position adjustment in there. For when you're at an auction or a draft, there is an adjustment to be made for catcher scarcity. But for middle infielders, I think it's a bunch of nonsense. Again, if anybody's read my book, in there I explain exactly why this is. And I think, in my opinion, I think I prove in my book there is no such thing as scarcity for middle infielders.
Interesting. Okay, well, that's why you want to get the book. Todd Frazier's on pace for a 30-20 year. He's been a fun player to watch this year. Unbelievably, and I mean, this has to be in the shallowest of leagues or dead leagues. He is available in some places. Is his improvement based on opportunity, or is there something in his numbers that makes you think maybe he's arrived?
I think he's arrived. I think it's partly he's about 28 years old, so he's kind of in that range where people are often improving. He's getting a better lineup spot. Last year, I think he hit mostly number 6. This year, he's hit a lot of number 2, some number 4. He's hit 4th and 5th a fair amount, so he's getting a better lineup spot. Also, at the beginning of the year, before the season started, the manager said that he wanted Frazier to run a little bit more, which in fact has panned out. Frazier is running more. He's on a pace of about 17 or so stolen bases. I really like him. In fact, he's been one of the highlights of my year because I got him on 3 draft teams, and so he's been one of my highlights. And yeah, I think he's definitely arrived. I think it wouldn't be surprising for him to have some tail off for the rest of the season because he's producing at such a high level right now. But I think he's definitely going to be a lot more valuable than what people paid for him this year.
And I think it's not unlikely that he'll probably go in the 2nd or 3rd round next year. Is that too high for him?
Let's see.
Pulling up the data.
You pulling up the data? Yeah. No. If he keeps at this level, no, not at all. Currently his pace, based on if you put it over the full season, he's at a $33 level also right now. So yeah, even if he tails off a bit, 2nd, 3rd round for sure. He's also this may not apply to next year. Right now, he's eligible at first base and third base, which is good. Although for next year, he probably won't have that first base eligibility anymore.
Brian Dozier's on pace for a 30-30 season. Okay, we've now thrown position scarcity out the window here. So, is his average drain a consideration? Is it possible that he could go 30-30 again next year? If he goes 30-30 this year?
Yeah, it's interesting. He was actually after 3 or 4 weeks, he was on on a 60-60 pace for a little while there. And so he's not running as much anymore. I'm not sure what that's about or if that's going to continue. But his stolen base level is definitely going down. He's just not running as much. But the homers keep coming. But if he, let's see.
Again, we're talking 2015, where players are going to be re-ranked here.
Yeah, I mean, if I was drafting for 2015 right now, and I'm looking at Dozier, I would kind of say maybe like a 25 homers, 20 stolen bases, which could be better. I like to be a little conservative, but I think you could count on 25 and 20, and hitting near the top of that lineup, 90, 95 runs, and et cetera. So even with like a 250-ish batting average, that's around $27 roughly. So that's very valuable.
Okay, so again, that'll probably be a 2nd, 3rd rounder. Sorry to
and I'm sorry, this is what I was saying earlier, like about the lower batting average guys. Like, don't be afraid with a lower batting average. Some people say, oh, he's going to hit 245. I don't want that. Well, he's worth $25 or so. And if he hit 280, he'd be worth $30. He'd be a first rounder or something.
There you go. Value is value. We'll be right back after this with more Larry Schechter. We're back on Razzball Radio with Larry Schechter. So, Larry, obviously Tanaka has been outstanding this year, an unbelievable first year. But there's been a debate among the Razzball crew whether or not they would take Tanaka ahead of Kershaw. To me, that's just nuts. And the reason is, A, Kershaw's track record. Kershaw's a bigger guy. He pitches in the NL West versus the AL East. Is it Is it close? Am I missing something? Who are you taking first next year between the two?
I will. This will depend a little bit on how the year plays out, obviously. But I mean, I would go Kershaw because what you say, Kershaw pitching in Dodger Stadium against the National League compared to, you know, the AL East and Yankee Stadium and the track record, I would go Kershaw. But after that, I couldn't argue with anybody taking Tanaka after Kershaw.
How high do you typically, or I shouldn't say this, where are you comfortable? How high are you comfortable taking a starting pitcher?
As with everything, it's all about the value.
Yeah.
If a player, if the value justifies it, a pitcher could be worth he could be in the top five. In fact, this year Kershaw, before he had his back injury, he was going, I think, like his ADP was about 5 in the NFBC drafts, and that to me was about right. I would have actually, I had it ranked like Trout and Cabrera, and then where most people had like Goldschmidt and McCutcheon kind of tied for third, I kind of had Kershaw lumped in with Goldschmidt and McCutcheon for third. By the time I actually got into a draft where I had to pick that high, Kershaw had his back injury, so
Right.
I actually held off of it because of that, which I kind of regret now because I got Carlos Gonzalez instead, and for a month I thought that was a really good thing, and now actually probably would have been better off if I gotten Kershaw in the first place.
Yeah, I'm really pushing to have Cargo's nickname changed to Car Glass. Another player who there was a lot of hype going into the season, and I think there's a bit of a misconception with Julio Teheran that he's a small guy, but he's not. He's 6'2", 200. He's pitched really well. Where do you see him going next year?
I think next year he's kind of in that upper echelon. Like after Kershaw, you got like Tanaka and
Wainwright.
Wainwright, Scherzer. I think Tieren's kind of close. He's like second or third tier if you want to put people into tiers. Yeah, he'll be in the second or third tier. Definitely. I think I don't think he's somebody who's like I don't think he's pitching over his head right now. He probably won't. What was his ERA now? It was like 240 or something like that. He's probably not going to stay down there to go up more toward around 3 or so. But yeah, I think he's really good.
What happened to Verlander this year?
That's been a huge topic of conversation, as you know.
I'm blaming Kate Upton.
It changes. It changes. It changes from start to start, and it's like now they're saying he made a mechanical adjustment. His last start was really good, and that's what happened at the end of last year. He made a mechanical adjustment, and then he was pitching like the Verlander of old for the last month of the year. But now it's like, well, if you made a mechanical adjustment at the end of last year, how did you lose it when you came out this year? You just lost everything again, and now you got to make another mechanical adjustment. So I don't trust the guy. And I don't think a lot of people at this point don't trust him now. And nothing would surprise me. If he pitches the rest of the season like the Verlander of old, that would not surprise me. On the other hand, if he continues this mediocre new guy that we've been seeing, that wouldn't surprise me either. So, right now to say what will he go for next year, who the heck knows? I mean, it's such a huge question what he's going to do the rest of the season.
I mean, you could argue he's almost if we were drafting today for next year, he's almost undraftable.
Well, the way he's pitching right now, yeah. In fact, but his last start, he was really good again. He made a mechanical adjustment. He pitched really well his last start. So if we were drafting today for next year, somebody draft him. But what would you pay? It's like God, not too much.
Hey, so I heard you're going on a really big road trip this year. Gonna hit some ballparks?
No, I don't
thought you
know where you
were.
heard that.
I thought you were going to Toronto.
No, who told you that?
You did.
I didn't say I was going to Toronto.
Okay.
I
don't know how I missed that. I was going to give you restaurant tips. I was going to tell you, where to go, who to see.
No, boy, you got me confused with somebody else.
Okay, I'm going through my Twitter, but it was you.
I'm going to Maine. You know any good places in Portland, Maine, or Freeport? And we may or may not swing by Boston for a couple of days on our way to Maine. We haven't decided that yet. So if we go to Boston, I don't need any tips. I'll be at Fenway Park. I know all the restaurants down there.
Hey, if you are going to Boston, make sure to tweet it out because, again, he is at Larry Schechter, LarrySchechter. You should get the people to come, the fantasy baseballers to come and interact with you if you are at a game. I mean, I'd love if, well, I mean, we've met, but if I was actually at a stadium and a fan, I mean, I'd want to come chat you up, buy you a beer,
Okay, all right, I'll let you know.
Maybe some lobster at Captain Nick's in Ogonquit, Maine. That's a good spot.
I'll be in Phoenix next March for Labor again.
Absolutely, and we'll be here too. Real quick, one last player I want to talk about, Chris Davis. Disappointing after 2 monster seasons, but he's just entering his prime. We don't have a lot of time here. Real quick, does Chris Davis bounce back, or are you concerned?
Yes and yes. I'm concerned he'll bounce back, but I don't think he bounces back to the level that most people were expecting, the people that took him in the first round, which unfortunately I'm included in that category. I took him in the first round of a draft, and I paid about $30 or something, and I own him in both Labor and Tout Wars. So not one of the bright spots this year.
But,
and I mean, he's got his last couple of years in Baltimore. He has a pretty decent track record. He hit like 285 and 270 or something like that. So I don't understand why he's hitting 220 now, other than a slump that he should come up. But he's obviously not going to hit anywhere near 50 home runs this year.
All right, the book is Winning Fantasy Baseball. You can get it at winningfantasybaseballthebook.com. That makes sense. He is Larry Schechter. Larry, really appreciate you joining us today on Razzball Radio. We'd love to have you back on anytime. You've been a great friend to the show.
All right, thank you, Nick.
We'll see you guys tomorrow back on Razzball Radio.